curse of the abandoned school, and the clock stopped. The first thing I noticed when I climbed the cracked steps of Hollowridge was how the sound folded in on itself. Even the air felt finite, as if someone had sealed the building against noise and left only the husks of echoes. The town had whispered about the clock for years, how it stopped the night the school closed, how nothing inside seemed to age after. My breath left a small cloud, steadied by a small, stubborn curiosity I couldn't name. I told myself it was a story. Curiosity is a safer word than obsession. Clara arrived with a camera that smelled faintly of chemicals, and a patience I admired. She never believed in ghosts. She believed in evidence and grain. The two of us moved through rooms like archaeologists, peeling back sheets, flipping open desks, finding names scratched in wood. Little things resisted explanation: chairs in odd arrangements, a music room piano with a single yellowing page of notes, footprints in dust that belonged to no sensible sized shoe. Every small anomaly felt like a door that wouldn't quite open. We learned the clock stopped at 11:07. The number sounded ridiculous when said plainly, but inside the school silence, it was sacramental. A janitor's name kept surfacing in old articles. Thomas Hargrove, described as meticulous, the kind of man who ironed his gloves. Townspeople offered the sort of explanations towns offer: grief, financial collapse, a bureaucratic chain of small, sharp failures. Yet the ledger, when we found it under a tarp in the boiler room, read like a conversation with absence. Dates, repairs, a line that cut off mid-word. On that torn page, someone had slipped a scrap with a single scribbled phrase: "It keeps what we leave." I wanted to scoff, to pin some rational explanation to the sentence, metaphor, an eccentric's note, but words carry gravity in small spaces. We carried the ledger into the gym, where dust had frozen the team's banners midsway. Clara's flash lit a wall of portraits, faculty frozen in state studio light. The photographs had been water-streaked until faces blurred into suggestion, gestures remembered without owners. Someone had set chairs in a long, careful row facing the stage, as if an audience had simply drifted away. The silence held patterns that made my skin feel watched. At the base of the stage we found, nailed beneath loose boards, a small, tarnished pocket watch without its chain. Its hands lay at 11:07. Later, in the tower, dozens of pocket watches would hang like a frozen constellation. But this one, clandestine under wood, felt like the first syllable of a sentence that wanted to finish my name. The clock tower staircase smelled of old iron and sunlight that had long ago stopped reaching. The pendulum hung perfectly still, though at the back of the little room there was movement. Dozens of watches, threaded from nails by corroded links. Each face was stopped at the same minute. We stood too long. Our shadows, thrown by Clara's small lantern, seemed to hesitate before returning to their owners. I felt, with a startling clarity, that the building measured us in returns and in how often we looked away. We took photographs and notes like an inoculation against the uncanny. Photos developed like proofs of memory. Yet, when Clara checked frames later, some negatives held faint impressions that weren't from our visit, profiles of faces not present, angles belonging to other nights. Once, in a classroom mirror, my my reflection lagged half a breath behind. If you put two photographs one above the other, movement would seep between them like water. The school began to feel less like a place than a patient collector, rearranging small things until they belonged to it. At midnight, or a midnight I couldn't place, we left and found the town unchanged, lamps warm, people moving like learned animals. But my watch, a modern band, ticked slow, and then not at all. The seconds stretched like wet rope. Panicked, I checked my phone. A photograph of our shoes on the gym floor I didn't remember taking. Clara had the same, a blurred image on her roll of film that showed a corridor with a door ajar that didn't exist. We agreed to go back the next day with better light. Once you're invited, the building seems to let you RSVP again. In daylight, the school was a different instrument, crisper and colder, but no less insolent. A teacher's schedule pinned on a bulletin board still had the day's lesson plans typed up, as if whatever stopped the clock had not bought silence, but suspension. We followed a series of marginal notes in the ledger that read like fragments of a sentence. Handle the mechanism gently. Do not let it wind. He counts our comings. The pronoun made my scalp tight. Who is he when the man on the masthead has been gone for decades? Confronted the idea that Thomas had not left because his work was incomplete. The town had once spoken of him with a fond, peculiar reverence. He had been the sort of man who would wind clocks before dawn. In the tower, we found a name tag trapped between cogs, Thomas. Its letters were worn but assertive. There's a certain terror in discovering a person in a place meant for timepieces rather than humans, like a face carved into a sundial. It suggested care, obsession, and something unpaid. Night after night, the same small adjustments began to happen. A door closed that we'd left open. A photograph on the gym wall tilted an inch. A chalkboard erased under our very noses. The ledger's final legible entry was a single sentence. If it forgets to stop, we will be kept. I started to dream in minutes stuck to the inside of clocks, tiny mechanical rooms where light was impossible, and minutes stacked like pennies. Waking felt like surfacing from deep water. And once, when I rubbed my eyes, my phone showed a map route that circled the school in an impossible spiral. We tried to leave the compulsion behind regular days, coffee, interviews where faces were sharp and time ruled our gestures. But the clock's stillness began to enter other rhythms. At work, a cafe's wall clock stuttered for a heartbeat and then resumed. A friend called with a story about a watch that refused to be thrown away. I found myself cataloging small things I might surrender. A pen, a photograph, the tendency to walk past the school's shadow without looking. The ledger sat folded on my kitchen table. Each object we had removed felt less like evidence and more like ballast. The night I understood the school's rule had happened in small increments. We climbed to the tower again for reasons that felt practical until they didn't. Up there, the air was bright with the crackle of unseen electricity, and the weight of the watches pressed some ancestral patience into me. I reached for one chain, and for a single cinematic breath, my hand moved inside a memory, not mine, an image of Thomas polishing brass, humming a piece of music whose tune I could not place. The building didn't keep time. It collected presence and folded it into the minute it had stopped. and when I expect the end will be a scream or a clear doorway out, the school offered something worse: ambiguity. I stepped into the corridor and came out at the same lamp post, an hour having passed, and no one remembering our arrival but me. In my coat pocket was a photograph I didn't recall taking Clara and me on the gym floor, smiling in exhausted relief. The clock in the background, emphatically frozen at 11:07. On the back, in handwriting that wasn't mine, a single line: "Keep what you give." I am not sure whether this was warning, instruction, or apology. We left the school with things still unresolved, as one leaves a relationship, tender, aware, and certain that the other party will reinterpret everything. The ledger went to an archivist, the photos to Clara's darkroom. Yet the clock lodged itself elsewhere. Sometimes, in quiet rooms, I think I hear a thread of pendulum, soft, patient, as if counting visitors. Once, months later, I found another photograph tucked into my journal, my own face, older by a fraction, standing in front of the tower, with the name Tag Thomas folded into my palm. The notation beneath was a date with no year. The school keeps appointments well. Now, whenever a clock in a shop stalls, or a stranger's watch hangs oddly from a chain, my mouth tastes of dust and old lacquer. People ask if I'm better now, if the story is done. I tell them what journalists tell people: the facts as we have them, the possibilities we can test. But sometimes, on a late evening, I press my palm against my chest and feel a tick that isn't mine. The tower's minute lives in me as a hollow rhythm that wants to be wound. Maybe that's the real horror. Not a scream, but a future in which your own heartbeat learns to keep someone else's appointment.